The day began with a sense of ordinary calm, the kind that lulls you into believing everything is as it should be. I was sipping my morning coffee when a stray envelope on the dining table caught my eye. It was addressed to Julia, written in a neat, familiar hand. For a moment, I felt a pang of curiosity, but I quickly brushed it aside. Why would a letter be left out like this? My curiosity won, and I tore open the envelope. Inside, I found a series of printed emails, their subject lines already hinting at something deeply unsettling. The sender's name was Mark, Julia's colleague. My heart sank as I realized the nature of their correspondence. The emails were laced with affection, intimate exchanges, and plans to meet. Each word seemed to echo louder in my head, amplifying the sense of betrayal that gripped me. It wasn't just casual conversation, it was personal, it was emotional, and it was unmistakably more than friendship. My mind raced with thoughts of how this could be happening just days before our wedding. Panic surged through me as I tried to reconcile this shocking revelation with the life I thought I had. The idea that Julia could betray me like this was terrifying. How could the person I loved and trusted be involved in such a deceitful relationship? My chest tightened, and my breath came in short, uneven bursts. This was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives, and now it felt like everything was collapsing. But then, something shifted within me. Amid the fear and confusion, a surge of pride and indignation began to rise. How dare they do this to me? How dare Julia, who promised to love and cherish me, turn her back and engage in this secret affair? The realization of her betrayal was overwhelming, but it also ignited a fierce anger inside me. I could feel my pulse quicken, my mind focusing on the anger that now dominated my thoughts. The fear was replaced by a burning sense of injustice. I was no longer just hurt, I was enraged. How could they think they could betray me and get away with it? The thought of them laughing behind my back, of their secret meetings and whispers, made my blood boil. I was no longer the victim of deception, I was the avenger. My heart pounded with the need to confront this betrayal, to expose it for what it was. I was done with feeling scared and helpless. The thought of Julia and Mark's duplicity fueled my rage, and with every passing second, my resolve grew stronger. I knew I had to act, to reveal their secret and make them face the consequences of their actions. The pain was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, driving force. The wedding, which once seemed like a joyful culmination of our love, had become a battleground. And I was ready to fight. The initial shock of Julia's betrayal had begun to settle into a cold, hard resolve. I felt a twisted sense of clarity in my rage, and with that clarity came a plan. I would use the tools at my disposal to expose the truth. The surveillance cameras installed around our house would be my weapon. I remembered the cameras we had installed for security purposes. They were positioned in strategic spots, entryways, the living room, and even the backyard. I had never thought much of them, but now, they would serve a different purpose. I would use their recordings to craft a damning, wedding video that would reveal Julia and Mark's deceit to everyone at the reception. With the plan set in motion, I delved into the painstaking process of preparing the video. Every night, after Julia had gone to bed, I would retreat to my home office, the dim light of my desk lamp casting shadows on the walls. The room was filled with the soft hum of my computer and the occasional clack of keys as I navigated through hours of surveillance footage. My objective was clear: to find and assemble the most damning footage that would make it impossible for anyone to deny the truth of Julia and Mark's affair. I meticulously combed through the recordings, isolating scenes that could be construed as evidence of their betrayal. There were countless hours of mundane footage, footsteps, doors opening and closing. The occasional glimpse of a passing car. But then, amidst the sea of ordinary moments, I found what I was looking for: snippets of Julia and Mark together, their interactions often appearing more intimate than I had ever seen. I zeroed in on these moments, extracting them from the longer footage and carefully arranging them to build a compelling narrative. The editing process was both excruciating and oddly satisfying. I used software to cut and splice the footage, ensuring that each segment flowed seamlessly into the next. I added transitions and effects to enhance the emotional impact, pairing the visuals with dramatic background music to heighten the tension. My goal was to make the video not just a presentation of facts, but a powerful, emotional statement that would leave no room for doubt. Each night, as I reviewed the clips, I struggled with an unsettling mix of anticipation and dread. The realization of what I was about to do weighed heavily on me. Yet, the thought of Julia and Mark's betrayal kept me focused, driving me to complete the video with meticulous attention to detail. I added a title slide with a seemingly innocuous label, Wedding Memories. The contrast between the intended sentiment and the actual content of the video was stark, and it only fueled my resolve. The final touch was an introduction that framed the footage as a special surprise for the wedding guests, designed to appear as a heartfelt tribute to our journey together. The night before the wedding, I reviewed the video one last time. My hands trembled slightly as I watched the culmination of my efforts, a meticulously crafted showcase of betrayal disguised as a celebratory memento. The scenes of Julia and Mark, when viewed through my carefully constructed lens, told a story of deceit and infidelity. With the video loaded onto a flash drive, I prepared everything for the big reveal. I arranged for the projector and screen to be set up in the reception hall, ensuring that all technical aspects were in place for a flawless presentation. The final step was to test the equipment to avoid any glitches that might compromise the impact of the video. As I stood in the empty reception hall, the quiet hum of the projector a constant reminder of what was to come, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. The stage was set, and my plan was ready to unfold. I had meticulously prepared every detail. All that was left was to see it through and face the consequences of exposing the truth. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a picturesque scene that seemed to mock the turmoil brewing inside me. I stood by the window of our bedroom, watching the guests arrive and the flowers being arranged with a growing sense of anticipation. The preparations were in full swing, and everything seemed to be falling into place, except for the gnawing tension that I couldn't shake. Julia was radiant in her wedding dress, her smile dazzling as she greeted our friends and family. The image of her joy seemed almost unreal to me now, a stark contrast to the storm that raged within. I forced myself to stay calm and play the part of the happy groom, masking the seething anger and anxiety beneath the surface. As the ceremony came to a close, the guests mingled and enjoyed the reception. Laughter and conversation filled the air, creating an atmosphere of celebration that felt increasingly surreal. I played my role, making small talk and greeting guests, all while my mind was fixated on the moment when I would unveil the video. The time for the video presentation drew near. I had chosen the perfect moment, after dinner when the guests would be settled and attentive. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every time I glanced at the clock, it seemed to move slower, as if mocking my eagerness to reveal the truth. The time had finally come. The guests were gathered, their chatter and laughter filling the reception hall. The dinner had been served, and the mood was lively, with everyone eagerly anticipating the next part of the evening. I glanced at the clock. Now was the moment I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath and made my way to the center of the room, where I had set up a makeshift stage for the video presentation. The hall gradually grew quieter as I approached, the guests sensing that something special was about to unfold. My palms were clammy, and I could feel the tension coiling in my chest, but I forced myself to maintain a composed exterior. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, trying to sound upbeat and enthusiastic despite the storm brewing inside me. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day with us. We have a little surprise for you, something we thought would be a wonderful addition to our evening." I gestured towards the projector and the large screen behind me. "We've put together a video that captures some of our favorite moments together. It's a compilation of memories and moments that we wanted to share with you all tonight." The projector whirred to life, and the screen flickered as the opening slide of the video appeared. The title, Wedding Memories, was displayed in elegant script, and I could see the guests' faces light up with interest. They leaned in, eager to see what I had prepared. The initial scenes were filled with standard wedding highlights, Julia and I sharing smiles, friends and family laughing, and beautiful shots of the venue. The guests watched with a sense of enjoyment, their faces reflecting the happiness of the occasion. I could hear appreciative murmurs and see smiles of approval. It felt as though everything was going according to plan. But then, the tone of the video began to shift. The transitions became more abrupt, and the background music, chosen for its dramatic effect, intensified the atmosphere. The footage moved from the wedding festivities to more intimate and private scenes, the kind that were captured in our daily lives but now appeared highly suspicious. The first scenes featuring Julia and Mark showed them in casual conversation, seemingly enjoying each other's company. At first, the content seemed innocuous, but the underlying context I had carefully edited started to emerge. My heart pounded as I saw the first gasps from the crowd. Whispers began to ripple through the room. As the video continued, the moments between Julia and Mark grew more personal. Their interactions, previously mundane, now seemed to carry a weight of secrecy and intimacy. I had carefully selected these clips to suggest a deeper, more romantic connection. I watched the expressions of the guests shift from curiosity to shock. The music swelled, heightening the emotional impact of each scene. I saw the moment when Julia's face appeared on the screen, her laughter mingled with Mark's, and I noticed a few of our friends exchanging confused and concerned looks. My stomach twisted in a knot of anxious anticipation. The video continued, showing snippets of private conversations, and the guests' reactions became more pronounced. Murmurs of disbelief grew louder, and I could see some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the pivotal scenes, Julia and Mark sharing an intimate moment that, when taken out of context, seemed undeniably suggestive. The guests' reactions were a mix of shock, pity, and anger. Some faces turned towards Julia, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and accusation, while others looked at me with a mix of confusion and disapproval. The video reached its climax with a series of clips that left little room for interpretation. The footage ended with a dramatic flourish, and the screen faded to black. A tense silence settled over the room, punctuated only by the sound of guests shifting in their seats and exchanging whispered comments. I stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My initial sense of vindication was overshadowed by the chaotic scene unfolding before me. Guests were now in heated discussions, some trying to comfort Julia, while others were confronting Mark. The festive atmosphere had been shattered, replaced by a whirlwind of emotions and accusations. Julia's face was a mask of shock and hurt. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around the room, searching for an explanation. Mark, too, was caught off guard, his expression a mix of embarrassment and anger. The wedding, which was supposed to be a celebration of our love, had turned into a battlefield of broken trust. I felt a pang of guilt as I saw the pain in Julia's eyes. The video, meant to be a tool of retribution, had become an instrument of public humiliation. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and I realized that my actions had consequences far beyond what I had anticipated. As the guests continued to react and the chaos unfolded, I found myself caught in a maelstrom of regret and uncertainty. What had started as a plan for revenge had spiraled into a situation I could barely control. The evening, once filled with hope and joy, was now a testament to the destructive power of my own decisions. The room was a cacophony of hushed whispers and anxious murmurs, the once joyous celebration now overshadowed by the shocking revelations on the screen. The projector's light cast an eerie glow on the faces of our guests, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, suspicion, and discomfort. The air was heavy with the weight of unspoken questions and uneasy glances. I stood at the periphery of the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the fallout from my actions unfold. The video had done its job, exposing what I had intended to reveal, but the reality of the situation was far more complex than I had anticipated. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, and the once festive reception had transformed into a battlefield of emotions. The guests were no longer engaged in the light-hearted conversations and laughter that had filled the room earlier. Instead, they gathered in small clusters, their voices low and urgent as they exchanged their reactions to the video. The occasional sharp whisper cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Did you see that? What does this mean?" someone asked, their voice trembling with shock. "I can't believe it. Is this for real?" another voice responded, filled with incredulity. The whispers grew louder, the collective sense of confusion and betrayal evident in every exchange. I noticed that many eyes had turned towards Julia and Mark, their faces now the focal point of suspicion and concern. Some guests approached them, their expressions a mix of pity and reproach, while others avoided direct eye contact, seemingly unsure of how to react. Julia stood near the center of the room, her hands trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around the room, seeking some form of solace or explanation. The mask of calm she had worn earlier was now gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that was impossible to ignore. Mark, too, was surrounded by a small group of guests who were questioning him with intense scrutiny. His usual confidence had been replaced by a look of discomfort and defensiveness. He attempted to explain himself, but his words seemed to get lost in the rising tide of skepticism and anger. The once clear boundaries of celebration had blurred into a messy landscape of shattered trust and hurt feelings. The festive decorations and elaborate arrangements now felt like a cruel joke against the backdrop of emotional upheaval. I watched as Julia's closest friends approached her, their faces etched with concern. They tried to offer comfort, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. The more they spoke, the more Julia's composure seemed to slip away. She hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face, her sobs barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. I could hear snippets of conversations around me, the words laced with a mix of anger and confusion. Why would he do this? One guest asked, their tone filled with disbelief. I always thought they were so happy together. This is just devastating, another replied, their voice trembling. The sense of collective shock was overwhelming. I could see the way the guests' eyes flitted back and forth between Julia and Mark, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. It was as if the video had shattered not only the trust between Julia and me but also the fragile sense of harmony among our friends and family. As the evening wore on, the guests' reactions grew more pronounced. Some began to leave early, unable to bear the uncomfortable atmosphere. Others stayed, but their conversations were subdued, their faces reflecting the weight of the revelations they had just witnessed. Julia's attempts to salvage the evening were met with mixed results. She tried to engage in conversations, but her efforts were marred by the lingering tension and the ever-present scrutiny. Mark, too, seemed to struggle with finding a way to address the situation, his attempts at explanations falling short of offering any real comfort. I found myself increasingly isolated, the very plan I had orchestrated now turning against me. The sense of vindication I had hoped for had been replaced by a deepening sense of regret. The celebration I had envisioned had become a painful reminder of the consequences of my actions. As the guests continued to react, I felt a growing sense of guilt and helplessness. The video meant to serve as a tool of justice had instead unleashed a torrent of emotional chaos. The evening, which I had hoped would bring clarity, had instead become a poignant testament to the complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. I stood alone, the weight of my decisions pressing heavily upon me. The once promising night had devolved into a scene of shattered illusions, and I was left to grapple with the profound impact of my actions on the people I cared about most. The reception, once filled with hope and joy, had become a painful reflection of the unpredictable nature of human relationships and the often unintended consequences of revenge. As the video played on, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. The whispers and murmurs from the guests created a backdrop of confusion and discomfort. I stood on the edge of the chaos, my eyes fixed on the screen, trying to maintain my composure. But as the footage continued, I began to notice something that made my heart skip a beat and my stomach churns with unease. The scenes that I had meticulously edited to portray Julia and Mark in a compromising light were now taking on a different hue. The warmth and intimacy between them, which had seemed so damning in my constructed narrative, began to look more like simple, genuine affection. They laughed together, shared moments of camaraderie, and spoke with a familiarity that, under closer scrutiny, seemed to reflect a deep friendship rather than a romantic affair. I felt a growing sense of unease as I watched them interact. Their gestures, the way they looked at each other, and the tone of their conversations now appeared less like evidence of betrayal and more like the kind of warmth one might share with a close friend. The subtle nuances of their interactions, which I had chosen to highlight for their emotional impact, now seemed to betray a different story. The realization hit me like a cold wave. What if I had misinterpreted the footage? What if the evidence I had so carefully assembled was not as conclusive as I had believed? The warmth in their interactions, which I had taken as a sign of a deeper connection, now seemed to be nothing more than the natural affection of a close friendship. My pulse quickened as I replayed the scenes in my mind. The very moments I had used to construct my narrative of betrayal were now showing signs of something much more innocent. The realization that I might have been wrong about their relationship was both sobering and distressing. I glanced around the room, trying to gauge the reactions of the guests. Their expressions of shock and disbelief were mirrored by my own growing anxiety. The video had created a dramatic spectacle, but now I was faced with the uncomfortable truth that my interpretation of the footage might have been flawed. The weight of my actions began to settle heavily on my shoulders. What if I had destroyed something precious based on a series of misunderstandings and misinterpretations? The thought of Julia and Mark, who might have been completely innocent, facing public humiliation because of my mistake was almost unbearable. I tried to steady my breath and focus on the video. Each scene, once so damning, now felt like a painful reminder of how easily one could be deceived by appearances. The warmth and genuine affection that Julia and Mark shared were becoming clearer, and the narrative I had so carefully constructed seemed to be unraveling before my eyes. As the video neared its end, I could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling of guilt and regret. My plan, intended to expose the truth, had instead revealed the fragility of my assumptions. The evening, which I had hoped would bring clarity and justice, was now a mirror reflecting my failings and misconceptions. As the final scenes of the video played out, the room was heavy with a tense silence. The guests were still reeling from the shock, their murmurs and whispers subdued as they tried to process the emotional whirlwind that had unfolded. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, hoping to find some semblance of clarity amidst the chaos. And then, it happened. In one of the last frames of the video, I saw Julia and Mark in a setting that was unmistakably different from the previous scenes. They were seated together in what appeared to be a cozy, private corner of a cafe, surrounded by notes, sketches, and a laptop. Their conversation was animated, their expressions filled with a mix of excitement and concentration. As I watched, my breath caught in my throat. Julia's face lit up with a smile as she discussed something with Mark, her enthusiasm unmistakable. Mark nodded, his demeanor reflecting genuine engagement and warmth. I could see the details of their conversation, and it became clear that they were discussing a plan, not for betrayal, but for a celebration. My eyes widened as I realized what they were talking about. Julia and Mark were planning something special for me, something far removed from the treachery I had envisioned. They were discussing ideas for an anniversary surprise, meticulously planning out every detail to make the occasion memorable. The notes scattered across the table included sketches of decorations, ideas for a romantic dinner, and heartfelt messages. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. The intimacy and warmth I had interpreted as signs of infidelity were, in fact, evidence of their collaboration on a meaningful gift. The realization that the very footage I had used to accuse them was a testament to their care and affection left me feeling a profound sense of guilt and remorse. My eyes stung as I continued to watch. Julia's voice, filled with excitement, described how they wanted to make our anniversary unforgettable. She spoke about personal touches, memories we had shared, and how they wanted to celebrate our relationship in a way that would be deeply meaningful to me. Mark's responses were filled with encouragement and support, his genuine interest evident in every word. The final scenes were a poignant reminder of how easily one could misinterpret actions and intentions. The warmth and closeness between Julia and Mark were not signs of betrayal but of a shared effort to create a beautiful surprise. The evidence of their care and thoughtfulness was now starkly juxtaposed against the narrative I had constructed. As the video ended and the screen went dark, the room was enveloped in a heavy silence. I stood there, the weight of my own mistake pressing down on me with a crushing intensity. The guests' earlier shock had transformed into a complex mix of confusion and pity. I could see their eyes darting between me, Julia, and Mark, their expressions reflecting a mixture of sympathy and bewilderment. I took a deep breath and turned to face the crowd. The realization of the truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew that I needed to address the situation head-on. The damage I had inflicted was not just a result of misunderstandings but a consequence of my misjudgment and the hurt I had caused. With a heavy heart, I stepped forward, my voice trembling as I addressed the guests. I need to apologize. The video you just saw was meant to expose something that, as it turns out, was never there. Julia and Mark were not hiding a secret affair but planning a surprise for me, one that I now realize was filled with love and thoughtfulness. The guests listened in silence as I continued, my words laced with regret. I am deeply sorry for the pain and confusion I have caused tonight. I let my anger and suspicion cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I hurt the people I care about most. Julia, Mark, I am truly sorry for the way I've treated you. Julia and Mark looked at me, their faces a mixture of hurt and cautious understanding. I could see the pain in their eyes, and it was a stark reminder of the consequences of my actions. The evening, which had begun with the promise of celebration, had become a painful lesson in the complexities of trust and the importance of confronting one's own mistakes. As I stood there, facing the aftermath of my decisions, I knew that rebuilding the trust and repairing the relationships that had been damaged would be a long and difficult journey. The night's events had unveiled not only the truth behind the footage but also the profound impact of my own choices. The path to redemption would be challenging, but it was one I was now committed to walking. The room was now a tableau of strained silence and muted conversations. The guests, still processing the turn of events, cast sidelong glances at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and disbelief. My feelings of guilt and shame were overwhelming, a crushing weight that left me feeling hollow and exposed. The truth that had emerged from the video was a devastating blow. I had been so convinced of Julia and Mark's betrayal that I failed to see the reality that was right in front of me. The warmth and affection I had misinterpreted were the hallmarks of a heartfelt surprise, a gesture that now made my actions seem even more egregious. My suspicions had been unfounded, and my attempt at retribution had only served to reveal my errors and insecurities. As the initial shock began to settle, a gnawing panic took hold of me. I needed to find Julia, to explain the mistake I had made, and to beg for her forgiveness. The realization of how deeply I had hurt her was almost too much to bear. I felt an urgent need to make amends, to somehow undo the damage I had caused. I scanned the room frantically, my heart racing. I looked for Julia among the guests, hoping against hope that she was still here, that there was still a chance to make things right. But as I searched, I felt a growing sense of dread. Her absence was unmistakable, and the more I looked, the more I came to realize that she had already left. I approached a few of our friends, asking if they had seen where Julia had gone. Their responses were filled with sympathy but offered little in terms of concrete information. It was clear that Julia's departure had been swift and decisive. She had left the reception, and in doing so, had taken with her the hope of any immediate reconciliation. The realization that Julia had already left hit me like a physical blow. My heart sank, and I felt a wave of panic and despair. The opportunity to explain myself, to offer a heartfelt apology, was slipping away, and the weight of my actions pressed down on me with a suffocating intensity. In a frantic haze, I tried to call her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling as I tried to convey the depth of my regret. "Julia, I'm so sorry. Please, listen to me. I made a terrible mistake, and I need to explain. Please, come back so we can talk. I need to make this right." As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep, gnawing sense of helplessness. The image of Julia leaving, hurt and confused, replayed in my mind. The evening that had begun with such promise had ended in a cascade of mistakes and misunderstandings. The pain I had inflicted was now compounded by the realization of how much I had misjudged the situation. The reception hall, once vibrant with celebration, now felt like a cold space. The guests had begun to leave, their conversations hushed and subdued. I was left standing alone, grappling with the enormity of my actions and the consequences they had wrought. The path to redemption seemed distant and uncertain. My attempt to expose a betrayal had only revealed my failings. The trust that had been broken was not just between Julia and me but extended to everyone who had witnessed the spectacle. The sense of isolation and regret was overwhelming, and the realization that I had lost not only Julia's trust but also my sense of dignity was almost too much to bear. As the last of the guests filed out of the reception hall, the once vibrant space fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. The laughter and music that had filled the room just hours earlier were now replaced by an echoing emptiness. The carefully arranged decorations and the remnants of the celebration seemed like cruel reminders of the joy that had been so swiftly shattered. I stood alone in the center of the room, my mind reeling from the weight of the evening's events. The grand plans and dreams I had nurtured for our future were now reduced to fragments of regret and shattered expectations. The image of Julia's face, filled with hurt and confusion, was etched into my memory, a painful reminder of the consequences of my actions. The reception hall, once a symbol of new beginnings, now felt like a mausoleum of lost hopes. The tables, once adorned with elegant centerpieces, were now strewn with the detritus of a celebration that had ended in chaos. The soft glow of the lighting, which had once seemed so warm and inviting, now cast long shadows across the space, amplifying the sense of desolation. I wandered through the hall, my footsteps echoing as I moved from one end to the other. Each step felt like a reminder of the future that had slipped through my fingers. The images of Julia and me, which had been displayed so proudly throughout the evening, now felt like mocking reminders of the trust and love that had been so carelessly dismantled. The weight of the evening's events was almost too much to bear. The guests had left, their whispers of disbelief and pity fading into the distance. The once live atmosphere was now replaced by a profound silence that seemed to amplify my feelings of guilt and regret. The future I had envisioned with Julia was now obscured by the wreckage of my own making. I looked around the room, taking in the remnants of what had been a night of celebration. The carefully planned details, from the floral arrangements to the elaborate centerpieces, seemed like cruel taunts against the backdrop of my failure. The dreams I had nurtured, the visions of a happy future with Julia, were now nothing more than broken pieces scattered across the floor. The realization of what I had lost was overwhelming. The trust I had built with Julia, the hopes we had shared for our future, were now nothing more than distant memories. The pain of knowing that I had caused such harm to someone I loved was almost unbearable. The consequences of my actions had not only damaged our relationship but had also left me grappling with a profound sense of self-reproach. As I stood there, staring at the remnants of the evening, I felt an acute sense of isolation. The people who had been witnesses to my mistake were gone, leaving me alone with the weight of my regret. The emptiness of the hall mirrored the emptiness I felt inside, a stark reflection of the broken dreams and lost future that lay ahead. The path to redemption seemed distant and fraught with obstacles. The trust I had shattered would take time and effort to rebuild if it was even possible. The reality of the situation settled heavily upon me, and the future I had once imagined with Julia now seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. As the last echoes of the evening faded into the silence of the hall, I knew that I was left to confront the consequences of my actions alone. The dreams and aspirations I had harbored for our future were now in ruins, and the road ahead would be one of painful reflection and hard-earned redemption. The weight of my own mistakes was a burden I would have to bear, and the journey to repair what had been broken would be long and uncertain. Days passed in a blur of regret and longing as I embarked on a frantic search for Julia. I called her phone incessantly, left countless voicemails, and sent messages that I hoped would convey the depth of my remorse. Each attempt to reach her was met with silence, and the lack of response only deepened the ache in my heart. My messages were filled with apologies and explanations. I tried to express my profound regret, hoping to make her understand that my actions had been driven by a misguided attempt at justice rather than any genuine intent to hurt her. "Julia, please, I need to talk to you. I made a terrible mistake, and I am so sorry for the pain I've caused. I need you to know that I've realized my errors and am ready to make amends. Please, let me explain." I also reached out through mutual friends, hoping that they might be able to convince her to talk to me. Each conversation was met with sympathetic nods and offers to help, but ultimately, they were powerless to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Despite my persistent efforts, Julia remained elusive. The reality of her absence was a stark reminder of the magnitude of my actions. The more I tried to reach her, the more I confronted the painful truth of what I had done. The silence that greeted my attempts at communication was a constant reminder of the hurt I had caused and the trust I had broken. With each passing day, I found myself grappling with a deep sense of isolation and self-reproach. The consequences of my actions were now inescapable. The joy and anticipation that had once surrounded our relationship had been replaced by a profound sense of loss and regret. The dream of a shared future seemed increasingly out of reach, and the path to redemption appeared fraught with difficulty. In this turmoil, I began to engage in a process of deep reflection. I spent countless hours alone, contemplating the events that had unfolded and examining the choices that had led me to this point. The emptiness of my surroundings mirrored the emptiness I felt inside, a stark reminder of the need for introspection and self-awareness. I came to understand that my actions had been driven by a deep-seated fear and insecurity, a fear of betrayal and a lack of trust that had clouded my judgment. My attempt to expose what I believed to be a betrayal had, in reality, exposed my vulnerabilities and shortcomings. The journey toward understanding and forgiveness was not just about repairing the damage I had caused to my relationship with Julia, but also about confronting my flaws and learning to move forward. I realized that true forgiveness began with being honest with oneself. I needed to confront my fears and insecurities, understand the root of my actions, and work toward becoming a more honest and compassionate person. The process of self-forgiveness was an essential step in finding a way to make amends and rebuild trust, not only with Julia but also within myself. As I continued my journey of self-reflection, I began to explore ways to heal and grow from the experience. I sought guidance from a counselor, hoping to gain insights into how I could better understand my behavior and work toward positive change. The conversations I had were often challenging, but they provided valuable perspectives on how to approach forgiveness and personal growth. In the end, the path to redemption was not a simple or easy one. It required confronting uncomfortable truths, acknowledging my own mistakes, and committing to a process of self-improvement. The journey was ongoing, and the future remained uncertain. But through the process of introspection and the effort to make amends, I began to find a sense of clarity and hope. Though the road to reconciliation with Julia was still long and uncertain, I remained committed to learning from my mistakes and growing as a person. The lessons I had learned were hard-earned, but they provided a foundation for a new beginning. The journey of self-discovery and personal growth was just beginning, and I knew that it would require patience, honesty, and a willingness to face the truth. As I stood alone, contemplating the future, I resolved to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment to personal integrity. The path to forgiveness and redemption was a challenging one, but it was a journey I was determined to undertake. The road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but it was a road I was ready to travel, armed with the lessons of the past and a commitment to creating a better future.